Every nation on Earth is currently drowning in the same ocean. The United States is carrying over $36 trillion in debt. Japan, the UK, and the Eurozone are facing deficits that are mathematically impossible to repay. You feel it every time you buy groceries, every time you pay rent, and every time you look at your shrinking savings. But here's the paradox that should terrify you. If every country is in debt and every citizen is losing purchasing power, who is on the other side of the trade? Who is collecting the interest? The answer is not the market. The answer is a design. We are taught that the economy is a chaotic force of nature. It isn't. It is a structured machine, an operating system built to funnel wealth upward, consistently and mechanically. And this machine has an architect. You know his name. You see it on university buildings, hospital wings, and city plazas. John D. Rockefeller. Most history books tell you he was an oil tycoon who died in 1937. They are wrong. Rockefeller didn't just build a company. He built a blueprint. He created the vertical integration, the regulatory capture, and the financial structures that run the world today. The system didn't die when Standard Oil was broken up. It evolved. It went underground. And now, in 2026, as we stand on the precipice of the greatest financial reset in human history, you are about to see that system execute its final stage. This isn't ancient history. This is a warning. To understand what is happening to your money in 2026, you must first unlearn a lie. We are often told that monopolies are evil. That is too simple. Villains in movies are evil. They act out of malice. The Rockefeller system is far more dangerous. It is brutal, not because it is malicious, but because it is efficient. John D. Rockefeller famously said, "Competition is a sin." Most people hear that as greed, but to an architect like Rockefeller, he meant it mathematically. To him, competition was waste. It meant duplicated efforts, price wars, and unpredictable profits. He believed that the ultimate goal of capitalism was not freedom, but order. And order requires a single hand on the wheel. So he designed a mechanism to replace chaotic competition with efficient tyranny. Here is how the mechanism works. You lower costs to impossible levels. You bankrupt the smaller players who cannot compete. You capture the regulators to write laws that only you can comply with. And finally, once the competition is dead, you raise the prices. This system is incredibly efficient. It is efficient at delivering goods. It is efficient at processing payments. But it is also ruthlessly efficient at extracting wealth from the bottom and pumping it to the top. Think of it like a perfectly designed mousetrap. To the engineer, the trap is a masterpiece of efficiency. It works exactly as designed. But for the mouse, that efficiency is fatal. The financial system you live in today is that mousetrap. It is not broken. It is working perfectly for the people who hold the springs. And to see how this trap was built, we have to go back to where it all began, Cleveland, Ohio. In 1870, John D. Rockefeller was 31 years old. He controlled 4% of America's oil refining capacity. By 1880, just one decade later, he controlled 90%. How does a single man conquer an entire industry so quickly? The answer lies in his psychology. Rockefeller was the product of two opposing forces. His father was a con man who sold fake cancer cures. His mother was a devout Baptist. Rockefeller combined these traits into a terrifying new archetype. The con man's ruthlessness mixed with the believer's moral certainty. He did not view his monopoly as a crime. He viewed it as a divine mission to bring order to chaos. While others gambled on drilling for oil, Rockefeller realized the power lay in refining. He implemented a strategy called vertical integration. Most refineries bought their barrels. Rockefeller bought the forest and built his own. While his competitors paid 25 cents per barrel, Rockefeller produced his for 15 cents. He owned the wagons, the warehouses, and the chemical plants. By controlling every step of the supply chain, he could sell kerosene at a price lower than his competitors' cost of production. Then came the second phase, horizontal consolidation. In 1872, Rockefeller launched what historians call the Cleveland Massacre. He approached his competitors with a simple, chilling offer. Sell your refinery to me at a fair price and receive Standard Oil stock, or refuse, and I will crush you. For those who refused, Rockefeller dropped the price of oil in their specific markets until they went bankrupt. Then, he bought their ruined assets for pennies on the dollar. In just 3 months, he absorbed 22 of his 26 competitors. This was not business competition. It was warfare. But Rockefeller had one more weapon in his arsenal, a weapon so secret and illegal that it would eventually force the government to rewrite the laws of capitalism. Most people think John D. Rockefeller won because he was smarter, faster, or worked harder than his rivals. That is the sanitized version of history taught in schools. The forensic reality is much darker. He won because he rigged the infrastructure of commerce itself using a secret mechanism called the drawback. This is the smoking gun that most modern economists ignore, but it is the key to understanding how the system actually works. We all understand rebates. Because Standard Oil shipped massive volume, Rockefeller forced railroads to give him a heavy discount. That is aggressive, but standard business. But Rockefeller wasn't satisfied with a discount. He demanded a drawback. Here is the specific mechanism. When a competitor, let's say an independent refiner in Pennsylvania, shipped a barrel of oil on the railroad, they paid the full public rate, perhaps 35 cents a barrel. But the railroad did not keep all that money. They secretly took a portion of that fee, often as much as 20 cents, and paid it directly to John D. Rockefeller. Let that sink in. Every time a competitor shipped a barrel of oil to try and survive, they were literally writing a check to the man trying to destroy them. It was a mathematical stranglehold. If his competitors shipped more oil to compete, they funded Rockefeller's war chest. If they tried to cut costs, they couldn't, because their logistics costs were subsidizing Standard Oil. It was a perfect, diabolical closed loop. He effectively levied a private tax on the entire industry. This wasn't just unfair. It was an extraction system designed to bleed the market dry. And how did he get away with it? Regulatory capture. This is the second pillar of the elite pattern. Rockefeller understood early on that the government isn't a referee. It's a weapon. He didn't just break the laws. He rendered them irrelevant. By the time regulators tried to intervene, the contracts were signed, the politicians were bought, and the drawback system was deeply embedded in the economy. He proved a thesis that still governs 2025. If you become big enough, you don't have to obey the rules. You get to write them. In 1911, the Supreme Court ordered the breakup of Standard Oil. It was hailed as a victory for the people against the robber barons. It was actually the moment the system became immortal. Rockefeller did not fight the breakup with panic. He welcomed it. Why? Because his legal architects had already prepared the next evolution, the transition from a trust to a holding company. A trust was a crude instrument of control, vulnerable to state laws. A holding company was sophisticated. It created a legal entity that produced nothing but owned the controlling shares of other corporations. This architecture shielded the owners from liability while maintaining absolute control over the flow of capital. This is the exact structure used today by Alphabet, Berkshire Hathaway, and every major bank on Wall Street. And here is the financial punchline that history books often omit. The breakup did not punish Rockefeller. It made him the richest man in modern history. When the monopoly was split into 34 pieces, companies we now know as Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and Amoco, the market discovered that the separate parts were worth far more than the whole. As the stock prices of these new companies exploded, Rockefeller's personal wealth didn't shrink, it tripled. The lesson is brutal. You cannot kill a system by chopping off its head. It just grows back like a hydra. The names on the gas stations changed, but the ownership remained exactly the same. The monopoly didn't die. It just went public. Fast forward to 2026. The names Exxon, Chevron, and Mobil still exist. But who owns them? The answer is no longer a single family. It is something far more powerful and far less visible. Enter the big three: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Together, these firms control over $20 trillion in assets. To put that in perspective, if they were a country, they would be the second largest economy on Earth, rivaling the United States and China. This is the perfection of Rockefeller's dream. In 1870, Rockefeller had to ruthlessly crush competitors to dominate a market. It was messy and public. Today, the big three simply buy everyone. Look at the shareholders of Coca-Cola. The top institutional owners are BlackRock and Vanguard. Now look at PepsiCo. The top owners are BlackRock and Vanguard. This is called universal ownership. It creates the ultimate illusion of choice. You see two brands fighting for shelf space in the grocery store. The owners see two revenue streams flowing into the same pocket. Whether you buy an iPhone or an Android, whether you fly United or Delta, whether you bank with JP Morgan or Citigroup, the capital flows upward to the same top shareholders. And they do not just collect dividends, they wield voting power. They sit at the table for every major corporate decision in America. They enforce policies like ESG scores that reshape entire industries overnight, bypassing the democratic process entirely. Standard Oil was clumsy. It had a face you could hate. The modern system is faceless. It hides behind the innocent acronym ETF, Exchange Traded Fund. It convinces you to put your retirement savings into diversified funds. But in reality, they are using your money to buy their control. You are funding the very monopoly that keeps your prices high. This is the 2026 version of the trust, and this time, it is too big to break. Now, look at the macroeconomic environment this system occupies. The United States debt is over $36 trillion. The debt to GDP ratio is at levels not seen since World War II. History offers only 3 ways to clear a debt burden of this magnitude. 1. Hard default. You admit you cannot pay. The system collapses instantly. This is political suicide. 2. War. You conquer new resources or destroy the creditor. This is the most destructive form of reset. 3. Soft default. You print money. You inflate the currency until the debt becomes meaningless in real terms. The elite pattern chooses option 3 every single time. To the average citizen, inflation feels like a disaster. To the architect of the system, inflation is a solution. It is a hidden tax that no one voted for, designed to transfer wealth from savers to debtors. Who is the biggest debtor in the world? The government. Who holds the hard assets, real estate, stocks, commodities that rise in price along with inflation, the holding companies, the BlackRocks and the Rockefellers? Who holds the cash that loses value? You. This is the ultimate reset mechanism. They do not need to physically confiscate your money from your bank account. They just need to make sure that by 2026, your money buys 30% less than it did in 2020. The numbers on your screen stay the same. The value evaporates. This is not a conspiracy, it is a mechanism. It is the cycle that ends every financial empire. And right now, the indicators suggest we are in the final innings of the current long-term debt cycle. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. If you overlay the economic chart of 1872 onto 2025, the pattern is unmistakable. We are currently standing in stage 6 of the collapse cycle, the loss of stability. The triggers are already visible. Look at commercial real estate. There is over $1.5 trillion in debt maturing by the end of 2025. Most of this debt cannot be refinanced at current interest rates. The regional banks that hold this debt are walking zombies. When they inevitably fail, what will happen? The government will not bail out the small players. They will let them bleed, just like Rockefeller let the independent refiners bleed during the price wars. Then, when the panic reaches its peak, the system, the big 3 asset managers, and the too big to fail banks will step in. They will buy pennies on the dollar. This is the 2025 version of the Cleveland Massacre. JP Morgan has already done it with First Republic Bank. BlackRock is positioning itself to buy distressed infrastructure and housing. The coming recession is not a failure of the system. It is a consolidation feature. The elite pattern suggests that by early of 2026 we will see 1. A wave of bankruptcies in small and medium-sized businesses. 2. A massive transfer of real assets, homes, land, and technology from individual owners to institutional balance sheets. 3. The introduction of new monetary tools, likely central bank digital currencies, to solve the crisis they allowed to happen. The chaos you see on the news is smoke. The fire is the liquidation of the middle class. And just like in 1870, the architect is waiting to buy the ruins. So, how do you defend yourself against a system designed to extract your wealth? You do not try to beat the casino at its own game. You stop playing by their rules. This is not financial advice. This is a historical survival guide. Based on the patterns of 1870 and 1930, there are 3 layers of defense you must build before the consolidation phase begins. Layer 1. The mindset of resistance. Stop feeding the monopolies whenever possible. Rockefeller's system relies on your convenience. Every time you choose a local producer over a global conglomerate, or use cash instead of a tracked digital transaction, you starve the beast. It seems small, but decentralized economic activity is the only thing the system cannot easily capture. Layer 2. Escape the paper trap. The system erases debt by devaluing currency. Therefore, holding your life savings in cash or long-term government bonds is dangerous. You are holding the very liability they are planning to inflate away. The architects of the system do not hold cash. They hold debt against assets. Layer 3. Own what cannot be printed. This is the ultimate lesson from the Rockefeller Trust. When the currency falters, capital flees to hard assets. Gold, silver, productive farmland, energy commodities, or mathematically scarce digital assets like Bitcoin. These are things that a central bank cannot print and a holding company cannot easily dilute. In a period of consolidation, wealth is not destroyed, it is transferred. It moves from those who hold paper promises to those who hold real things. The goal is not to become a billionaire. The goal is to ensure that when the dust settles on the 2026 reset, you are still standing on solid ground, while the unprepared are washed away. John D. Rockefeller died in 1937, but the machine he built is more alive than ever. It has evolved from Standard Oil into the passive index funds that own the world. It has evolved from simple price wars into complex monetary resets. The system is not broken. As we have seen, it is working exactly as designed, extracting value from the many to concentrate it in the hands of the few. We are approaching the end of the long-term debt cycle. The year 2026 is not just another year on the calendar. It is a mathematical inevitability. The consolidation is coming. The inflation is coming. The transfer of wealth is already underway. Now, you have a burden. The burden of truth. You can no longer claim ignorance. You can choose to go back to sleep, trust the official narrative, and keep your savings in paper currency that is being dissolved by the day. If you do that, you become the liquidity for the next Rockefeller. Or, you can choose to see the wires. You can choose to position yourself in hard assets, support decentralized systems, and refuse to be a cog in their machine. This channel does not exist to entertain you. It exists to track the collapse of the old order and the birth of the new one. If you want to see the signals before they become headlines, and if you want to understand the moves of the smart money before the rest of the world panics, subscribe. The system is ready for the reset. The question is, are you?